Welcome to Press TV's news review, where we focus on some of the top stories of the day. Stay tuned. On this news review, Iran's president says the U.S. proposed deal of the century for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will become the bankruptcy of the century and definitely will not come to fruition.
Over the past 2 years, the plots hatched by the enemies of Islam against Al-Quds have remained futile. They have lately focused on what they call the deal of the century, which in my opinion will be political failure of the century and will yield no results for its sponsors and masterminds.
Hassan Rouhani was speaking at the International Quds Day rally in the capital, Tehran. He said the day manifests a confrontation between all Muslims and aggressors. The Iranian president said the event conveys a message that Palestine will be alive forever and Al-Quds will remain for Muslims. He highlighted the resistance of Palestinians against Israel. Over the past 71 years, Rouhani stressed that Palestinians will ultimately emerge victorious against the regime and Palestine will become a safe place for Muslims, Christians and Jews. Joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have Palestinian scientist and author Mazen Ghamsi, and also joining us from Niagara Falls is political commentator Jason Unruhe. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Ghamsi and Bethlehem. Sir, let's talk about, first of all, the significance of Al-Quds Day this year, when we're waiting for the United States and Israel to unveil the so-called deal of the century, and also give us your thoughts on the regional and Muslim countries' response to that deal.
Thank you very much for having me. So, yes, indeed, this is Al-Quds Day. Here was 250,000 Palestinians managed to reach Al-Quds and pray in Al-Quds despite the Israeli obstacles. Unfortunately, as we heard from you also earlier in the newscast, that 2 Palestinians were killed as they tried to reach Al-Quds to pray. One is a 15-year-old Palestinian, unfortunately, who also had run-ins with the Palestinian Authority before. And so, indeed, we have a struggle that's ongoing, as you pointed out, and as speakers pointed out in other settings. The struggle goes on. As far as the deal of the century and the response to it, and really the pathetic conference that was held in Mecca, trying to use a holy site to prop up a regime that is supported by Israel and the United States, was all I can say is really this is expected. It goes back to a time of the Baghdad conference in the 1950s, where they held conferences and alliances to try and stand against revolutionary forces, leftists, Islamists, or other revolutionary forces here. This is continuing process of struggle, which unfortunately I don't see that it will be ending soon. It might be a long-term struggle for us, but we will persist. As you also pointed out, there are 13 million Palestinians. There are 450 million Arab people who do not accept their government's complicity. There are over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. There are Christians in the world who reject this. There are Jews who also reject this tyranny of oppression.
Thank you. Let's cross over to Jason Unruhe. Sir, give us your perspective on this so-called deal of the century. Segments of it is supposed to be unveiled in Bahrain, but the legitimacy of that conference itself is under question now.
Well, I would certainly think so. This would be closer to possibly the catastrophe of the century. Exactly what powers within Palestine agreed to this, to undermine themselves? I don't think there's any legitimate authority in Palestine that would do that. This is straight up nothing more than a power grab for the legitimacy of Israel, essentially the terrorist state, the U.S. proxy within the Middle East. Israel has always struggled to some degree or another to maintain its legitimacy, despite the fact that it has numerous legal functions behind it, and many against them, many of which Israel itself does not follow, yet uses those same laws to prop up their own legitimacy in this case. What's really significant here is that this is such an insult to the people of the world. This isn't even just an insult to global Islam, but to the concept of human rights in general. This is a gigantic blow to it. This is a tremendous insult to it, to the dignity and rights of many of the oppressed people around the world. In this particular case, it would be the Palestinians. This is just, from a human rights perspective, this is simply unacceptable. This is a gathering of the elite, of the imperialist powers, of the Zionist powers, to get together and decide for themselves that they own the land that belongs to someone else. This very much reeks of a tremendous elitism, some kind of manifest destiny kind of belief that they're just entitled to the land inside of Palestine, despite the fact that morally and to some degree legally as well, Israel is illegitimate to begin with. I mean, this is very much an act of theater. This totalitarian act has been coming for a while. This insult to democracy and freedom and the human rights of the Palestinian people. This is all just a gigantic show to try to give a veneer of legitimacy to the entire process, when it is very clear that this whole meeting is nothing more than an affront to common decency.
And just one last question, a quick response. Our guest, Mr. Ramsi in Bethlehem, believes that resistance is the only viable option. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, absolutely correct. What else is there? If you sit down and you try to negotiate with Israel, it doesn't work. If you try to act in good faith with Israel, it doesn't work. If you try to come to the negotiating table to act peacefully, it does not work. Israel has certainly shown that it simply does not care about the Palestinian people. They would be perfectly happy if they managed to kill every single last Palestinian and took their land. There is no debating with someone like that. There's no coming to the negotiation table with people like that. Total resistance is not even just a matter of, a life with dignity or without, but literally life or no life.
All right, thanks a lot. Political commentator Jason Unruhe joining us from Niagara Falls, and also special thanks to Palestinian scientist and author Mazin Ghumsiya joining us from Bethlehem. That's it with this edition of Press TV's News Review. Stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. Bye for now.